Good afternoon, folks. Thank you for coming back for take two. That is our second show of the 2018 season here at Beyond Clean with Dave. Now, last week you heard from Lindsay Huck, an office manager at a janitorial service, and she was very inspiring. This week, we're going to hear from an industry professional. Dr. Linda Lee is here to talk to us about what she considers the invisible threat. It's that stuff that's in the air, that stuff that we breathe and we don't know what we're breathing. She's going to talk about that in our indoor environments. I love one of the little pictures she's going to have. It's all about this little snow globe, and I think you'll enjoy it too. So watch the show, and we'll talk after it's over. I'm here today by Dr. Linda Lee, who is here to talk to us about the air we breathe, what is in it, and the indoor air quality of the buildings we live in. So I believe Dr. Linda Lee is here on Skype with us from Texas somewhere.
Yes, hi Dave, how are you today? I'm actually calling in from Austin, Texas, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about my interest in this area. I've spent my career trying to improve the work environment for employees, people, patients, staff, people visiting buildings, and the air is really important to me, and I believe everybody deserves clean air.
So you've been working on this subject for quite some time, and I know that myself, being a chronic asthmatic, I'm extremely concerned about the air I breathe, but I also understand that there's a lot of people over the last decade that they're becoming more aware of this issue as well.
You're exactly right, because we only have one set of lungs, and without those operating fully, there may be some limitations on people's lives. You yourself has said you're a chronic asthmatic, and you know that if you're not breathing clean air, it's difficult for you to breathe.
Well, and we can't see what's in that air like we can see things on the surface.
Yeah, exactly. I like to think of the air as the invisible threat. Because, if we can see things, we respond. So if I see smoke in a room, I go the other way. Right. But I was at a building the other day and the fire alarm went off. And what did everybody in the hotel do? They opened their door, they looked to the left, they looked to the right, they didn't see any smoke, and so they went back into their rooms. But we know that the threat of the air we don't necessarily see. And I like this little picture of Pigpen from the Snoopy comics, because it gives you an example. If you could just see what happens when you're just even walking.
Now, if we all had this little dust storm that we could actually see around us, it'd be just, we wouldn't even want to breathe at all.
Well, we would protect ourselves, wouldn't we? We try to get away from it. We see this a lot if you travel in Asia during cold and flu season. A lot of people will have masks on. It's because they're protecting themselves from what I like to call the invisible threat. NIOSH, or the National Institutes of Occupational Safety and Health, have a really great training video for housekeepers on the dangers of just flushing toilets. So I like to think about air as what goes up must come down. So if you think about a snow globe and you just shake it up, whatever was on the surface goes into the air. And then eventually that settles out, and then it's back on the surfaces. And
you don't mind if I kind of steal something from you here, because when I saw this picture in your presentation, I was like, this is a perfect example of how the environment is impacted. And we think just because it settles that it never goes back in the air. But I shake up that snow globe and here we are breathing it again.
Exactly. And it's not even that you have to shake up the room. All you have to do is have the air conditioning or the heat turn on and off. All you have to do is have the students just walk into the room.
Well, I talk about that, Dr. Lee, and the fact that we run these vacuums, and then all of a sudden we've taken what was on the floor and now we're breathing it.
Exactly. Well, not only that, just the air, the high amount of air coming through there. A lot of times you can see that if you look through the window and you've been cleaning the house, what do you see? Little particles. They're like little glistening snowflakes in the air. And eventually you look and they're gone. So where do you think they went? Well, they went back on the surfaces.
And then we as humans, we're walking around, we're touching these surfaces. It doesn't stay on the surface, and are we adding to that?
Well, people are shedding bacteria all the time. Opening the window, you've got lots of dust and pollen and things that are in the air, chemicals coming into the room. And if you could think about it, if you could see all those little dots, just making your bed, you can imagine in the morning when you get up and you shake your sheets out, all of those little dust mites and all of those little particles that we see on the TV commercials are just going up into the air. And so when they hit our breathing zone, which is where we're most concerned about, flying around the air, flying around the room is not really an issue until you start breathing it. And once you start breathing it, all those little particles go in and out of your lungs, and sometimes they stay. And when
so this indoor air that we've now got these buildings that are so tight, we keep just recirculating this biological load of all of this stuff, don't we?
Yeah, and a lot of times we hear people talk about sick building syndrome. And sick building syndrome is that you're not bringing in enough fresh air into the building, or you don't have ways of getting rid of it. So if you can think about having a conference room and a whole group of people come in there, well, what happens is that the more people that come in there, the higher the biological load of the room, and quite frankly, the less oxygen that's in the room, because people are talking and people are in the room and the whole room dynamics change. Now you hope with conference rooms, you've got a lot more air coming in and going out per hour so that you can accommodate all of that. But you're right, if you're not got high levels of fresh air coming in, you're just recirculating the same air through the air handlers.
And so the thing is we talk with here at the Academy, we're talking about a lot of our clients are educational institutes and stuff. So you're talking about not only in business, but also in these school environments, these people are trying to comprehend and learn. This has got to affect them.
Oh, absolutely. Not only that, but you can think about schools. Schools, just by the fact that all the kids go out and play and they're coming back into the classroom, we know that the pollen and the dust and the dirt and all of that stuff just accumulates on people. And so then they bring it back into the classroom. And so what you're dealing with is that people are shedding 37 million bacteria per hour. Obviously some more, some less, but you're adding that to the bioburden of the room. So if you think about it, if you're an asthmatic like you and you have triggers or things that cause that asthma to be bad or cause you to have a reaction, that could be environmental. It could be things that are being brought into that classroom. It could even be things that are already in the classroom, like desks and chairs and carpets and rugs. So you can think about every time you vacuum a carpet, and I think you mentioned this, you're vacuuming this, and if you're not HEPA filtering that air, which is using a high particulate filter, you're just taking all of that air, you're getting the large particles impacted in the bag, and the rest of it just going back out in the air in ultra fine particles.
Well, as someone that has had double pneumonia, chronic asthma, I'm actually concerned. I now am in the older age group and I'm going to healthcare facilities more and more. And I continue to think about this because what you're talking about right now is the general population, what we consider. But when I go into a healthcare environment, how many of these surfaces and how much of this air stuff is impacting those areas where I'm actually trying to go get healed?
Well, I think you're exactly right. The thing about hospitals is that if you talk to most doctors, they'll tell you the longer you stay in the hospital, the higher your risk is of probably getting an infection, because there are a lot of people with infections in the hospital. So what you want to do is you want to take extra precautions. You see doctors and nurses and housekeepers washing their hands all the time, because we know that washing your hands can improve your health, your overall health. But what about the air? because people who are in there, there's almost nothing is being done for the air in buildings in general. Now there are some things, but what if we could do something to add some extra protections to the air?
Well, yeah, you're talking about, we see people come in and they're going to take your blood and they have gloves on. And even us in the cleaning profession, we have gloves, we have goggles for splashing of chemicals, but very seldom do any of us see people with a personal protection for respiratory.
Well, personal protection for respiratory is often used in the hospital if somebody has a respiratory disease. But the issue is that we like to think of things in very nice little boxes: contact pathogens and respiratory pathogens. Well, if I don't have a respiratory pathogen, we're making the assumption that I'm not going to get that disease, or I'm not going to get that exposure anyway, but through respiration. But many studies are showing that the air may actually be a pathway for transmission that hasn't necessarily been considered in the past. A perfect example is a common diarrheal disease condition called C. diff. And in that particular case, the C. difficile, or Clostridium difficile, the exact name, is thought of being transferred by contact, and that's absolutely true. But several studies by Shaughnessy have shown that in the air, the little particles of C. diff become airborne, whether it's flushing the toilets or doing just normal activities or carrying it from person to person into the room, that these are often carried in the air and then eventually settle onto surfaces. So what if you could remove them from the air before they ever settle and add to that pathway of contamination?
Well, and what you're talking about is we never know whenever we're in an environment where somebody has had this issue. And, I look at curtains in a patient room, and I think of all of the stuff that settles in the air on that. And every time that they're opening and shutting that, then here we go, just throwing it all in the air again. If we could have something that actually pulled it off and cleaned that, because we're talking about these viruses, bacteria, this fungi, this stuff, it's not just here today, gone tomorrow. It stays around for quite some time.
Exactly, and there was a study done in late 2000, I think around 2006 or 7, at MD Anderson that showed that the highest level of exposure to patients was right after the room was clean, because no matter how many steps you take to use either a wet process to clean or microfibers or all sorts of things, when you start going in and you clean and you're agitating that air, you're moving things around in the room, things are going to become airborne. And until they settle out, they're in the air. So a lot of hospitals and schools and quite frankly, public buildings have added UV or UVC disinfection to their air handlers. And they're really good for keeping the drip pans clean, keeping the heating and cooling coils clean, keeping the ductwork. But the issue is that what that study at MD Anderson showed was that the material's already in the room. And certainly the air handler is exchanging air in the room.
Right.
But what you find is that people are continually contaminating that space. So the grandkids come and visit grandma. They've been in school all day. They're shedding all the stuff that's been in the outdoor environment into there. The healthcare worker comes into the room and they just took care of a patient in another room, and they have things on their clothes.
Right.
And we find this in schools all the time. One kid gets sick in a classroom and all of a sudden the teacher's sick and all the kids are sick. There's been probably around $50 to $500 million shown by CDC in collateral illnesses caused by well baby visits to the doctor's office.
Well, isn't this why we really have a flu season in our nation, is because we just keep perpetually moving these things around. They don't die just immediately, they stay with us. And we're not actually cleaning the air every time somebody's in that area.
Well, that, and it's wintertime and things are buttoned up. And when do kids go to school? In the winter. So the schools are buttoned up, they're cold, they're hot, wherever you live, but the windows are closed, the doors are closed. And so all of the things that are in that space are being expected to be handled by the air handlers. And the issue is...
But UV isn't only in the air handlers, correct? I mean, we've been using UV for this in other areas other than just in the air handlers, right?
Correct. But, and the important thing here is that it's not been until now really handled at the room level. So, so I work for a company that has a product called VitaShield. Now, what you find is that there are all sorts of UV products in the environment. There's UV robots. There's a lot of good studies that have been done by them that shows they're great at decontaminating the surfaces. So in a terminal clean where you're trying to get the room really clean in a hospital, but what happens is as soon as you take that out of there, then you put people in there, you recontaminate the space. There are chemicals that are used in the air when the room is not occupied, because you can't be occupied in the room when you're using those. Right. Water is treated with UV. Operating rooms, after surgeries, and everybody's gone home, they turn on UV. But what if you could get that UV, because again, you don't want to be exposed to UV. So what if you could get that and you could actually do what you're doing in your air handlers in the room? So one of the things that we've been studying is what if we bring that to the room where children are, and you could run it in a completely shielded. So it's basically in the ceiling plenum of the room, just like you have it in your air handler. And so what we found is that by doing that, we're able to bring clean air to the room. And as you can see, it's in a ceiling fixture. It draws air into it. It treats the air above the ceiling and then puts it back into the space. So you're basically bringing clean air, continually treated for bacteria and funguses and viruses and all sorts of things that make up the bioburden or the microbiome of the room air. And so you're continually giving kids or building occupants, offices, hospitals, schools, clean air where the air is being contaminated, which is at the source where the people are.
So as I'm listening to you here, I'm thinking about that snow globe. I keep going back to that, but I'm thinking about that snow globe of, you know, as I go around the room and do my nightly or daily cleaning routine, even though I'm trying to do this with a HEPA filter that you mentioned earlier, I'm still going to be recirculating a certain amount of pathogens that is just naturally going to happen. And so these kind of devices are going to assist me long after I'm gone, right? And on a 24/7 basis?
Exactly. So for 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365, this unit is running in the background. And so what you're doing is you can imagine a bunch of kids running into a classroom after recess.
Right.
And they're just doing kid things. And all of this stuff is back in the air. So this is running in the background, very quiet. It runs at less than 30 decibels. And so it's running quietly in the background, continually cleaning the air and trying to provide a much safer environment or a much cleaner environment for the occupants of that classroom.
Okay, I want to go back to what you said earlier, Dr. Lee, and the fact that, you know, the people that looked out the hall and they couldn't see the smoke one way or the other. How do we go about letting people know that this actually has results and that we can measure these results?
I'm sure that there's been some studies or some tests or something done other than just, hey, we know it's a good thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. There's been a lot of studies done, a lot of it done in healthcare environments, some of it done, even in marijuana grow farms, we've done studies. But the studies have shown that we've been able to reduce anywhere from 50 to 80% of the bacteria and fungus in the air. We've studied pharmacies. You can imagine a pharmacy where you're waiting at your minute clinic to get seen, and the people sitting all around you are coughing and sneezing because they have the flu. Wouldn't you feel better as a patient if that air was cleaner? Wouldn't you feel better if you were the nurse sitting in the school, in the nurse's office, and you got kids in there with runny noses and coughing and carrying on, if you were continually cleaning the air in that office space?
Well, that makes me remember, I talked to an epidemiologist one time at a county health location, and he said the worst thing you can do is come and sign in with the pen that we give you because everybody else has touched it. So what you're saying here is, whenever I go in for a checkup, I'm breathing everybody else's bad air.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that's what I was saying about that CDC study of collateral illnesses to moms and dads and well kids by just taking the baby to the doctor, is that by not separating those two groups. But can you imagine if you took your child to the pediatrician and in the well baby area where you hope everyone is well, and in the sick baby area where everyone is sick, they were actually cleaning the air. They were actually treating the air in that space so that your kid wasn't getting what every other kid that came in that day. Well, the same thing happens in a classroom. No one is sick in your house, yet your kid comes home and they're sick, and then all of a sudden everybody in the house is sick. So this isn't going to cure everything, but the idea is to provide a whole lot of things, just like with that pen. You should be washing your hands all the time if you work in a school, in an office building, in a hospital. But we also want to provide clean air and safe air to breathe, because a lot of those pathogens that you're trying to protect yourself can be flying around in that office area. And so we just want to take an extra step to say you could be much safer. You could reduce the amount of bacteria and fungus in the air, thus also reducing it on treated surfaces, because remember, in the snow globe, what goes up must come down, and if you take it out and you've removed it, there's a lot less coming down. Got lots of studies that show this. UV has been historically used for disinfection. You can imagine the old TB sanatoriums where they would put people that had tuberculosis. They would treat it with that. So we feel like an engineering control that's operating in the background, that doesn't require anybody to do anything, is a much better cleaning procedure for the air than if somebody has to do something and we're expecting already busy people that have too many things on their plate. So we think that this is another thing that will help protect students, office workers, hospital staff, patients, visitors to the environment.
You know what? I'm right along with you, Dr. Lee, because one of the things I teach in classes here at the Academy is that 1 in 10 adults, 1 in 12 children today have chronic asthma, and that's just the ones that we know. And that's only one of about 13 or 14 respiratory illnesses. And this is what you're talking to. You're talking to you're talking to my lungs today. This is what I'm hearing. And in the cleaning industry, of which I've been in all my life, I think, we clean the surfaces and we do what we can, but you're breaking the chain of infection by cleaning the air.
Well, can you imagine if you went to school or you went to work and your allergies weren't bothering you all day? Asthma is certainly very significant, but even things like reducing the allergens in the environment, where you're not having a runny nose, or you're not got a tickle in your throat, or you're not coughing because you've reduced the amount of indoor air allergens that are causing people, or those tight buildings we talked about earlier. A lot of times that smell, when you smell in a building, are molds and funguses, and they're just growing unabated somewhere that people can't find it. So they just leave it and it continues to grow. We can imagine if you could treat the room air even in your office or in your classroom. So you're exactly right, Dave. Everyone deserves clean air.
Dr. Lee, where can people get more information on this other than coming to the Academy?
Well, they can go to the VitaShield website, which is just vitashield.com. They can certainly email me. I think my email is on the screen. But even if they just want to go to the website, we've got so many great articles and videos and information just about healthy, clean air and how to protect yourself when you're concerned about the air. So whatever your issue is, you can get some really good videos and a lot of great material on clean air at our website.
Now, I know that you heard her talk about that snow globe and all of that stuff that circulates around in the air. Did you catch that UV has been used for, well, quite a long period of time? We've been using it for a lot of things. I think it was very interesting what Dr. Lee had to say about using UV to clean the air. You know, we spend a lot of money, a lot of time in our industry cleaning all these surfaces here, but I think what we breathe is extremely important. So I really appreciate the time that Dr. Lee spent with us this afternoon. Now, if you know an industry professional that has something like this to say that's, well, you know my 3 words, healthy, positive, and proactive, we want them on the show. That's Beyond Clean with Dave. Send me an email, get hold of my staff. We'd love to have them on the show. Now, you can also see any of our social media outlets. That's on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. Hey, we're all over the place. Go to our website, beyondcleanwithdave.com. Look at last year's episodes and keep up with this year's too. So, well, until next time, right here from Orlando, I'm Dave Thompson. Keep changing your future, keep those changes healthy, positive, and proactive. And remember my mantra, I am a janitor and I save lives. Thanks for watching.